introductions, then, and you can get the more detailed material in the biographies that are in your packet. Yeah.
Mike?
It's on. It's green.
Closer?
It has this really narrow V that, let me explain audio engineering.
All right. Well, it does help
It's a
when the room is quieter. So. All right. So we are going to have a panel on authors' perspectives. I'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll go through a series of questions, and then at the end there will be an opportunity again for audience questions. So to my immediate left is Rick Carnes, who's a Nashville songwriter who has earned 40 platinum albums. That's not bad. With songs recorded by artists Garth Brooks, Reba McEntire, Alabama, Steve Wariner, and Dean Martin. His song, I Can't Even Get the Blues No More, was Reba McEntire's first '1 single, and Long Neck Bottle, recorded by Garth Brooks, set a record on the Billboard charts by entering the charts at number 10. In 2003, he was elected president of the Songwriters Guild of America, and in 2004, he was elected a vice president of the National Music Council. And in 1912, he became co-chairman of the Music Creators North America.
1912.
Is that right?
1912?
I'm sorry.
I'm not quite that old.
Sorry, that was a mistake. You look a little younger.
It surprised me, that's all I mean.
So, anyway, and then,
That was the year you had a big player piano hit.
The piano roll, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it counts to have that many hits when it was over so many years. All right. Next to Rick is David Hajdu. He's the longtime music critic for the New Republic and a professor at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism.
Since 1911.
Since 1911. And he teaches a seminar in arts and culture. He's the author of 4 books, 3 works of cultural history, Lush Life, a biography of Billy Straythorne,
Great.
Positively 4th Street, The Lives of Joan Baez, Mimi Baez Farina, Bob Dylan, and Richard Farina, and The 10-Cent Plague, the great comic book scare and how it changed America. And he also has written a collection of essays. His essays in journalism have been published in The New Yorker, The New York Review of Books, The Atlantic Monthly, and The New York Times Magazine, among other publications. And then next to me on my right is David Lowery, who's a Renaissance man, a mathematician, writer, musician, producer, and serial entrepreneur from Richmond, Virginia. In the early 1980s, Lowery founded the critically acclaimed ensemble Camper Van Beethoven and associated record label Pitch a Tent Records, which helped jumpstart the indie rock movement. In 1991, Lowery moved on to the ensemble Cracker, which produced 5 top 10 alternative rock radio tracks and 3 platinum albums. During this time, he also produced albums for critically acclaimed and commercially successful artists. And in 2011, he began teaching economics and finance of the music business at the University of Georgia. Then at the far end is Eugene Mopsik, who's the executive director of the American Society of Media Photographers, ASMP.
Close personal friend of Louis Daguerre.
And has been a prominent advocate for the rights of photographers and other visual artists. During his tenure at ASMP, ASMP has become a leader in current issues such as copyright registration of images, social media terms of service, orphan works, and the exploration of new business models. Mr. Mopsik is active in policy debates, and most recently, he testified before the House Committee on the Judiciary on copyright's role in innovation. He serves as a vice chair of the Picture Licensing Universal System Plus, which I hope you'll say a few words about. Prior to his position at ASMP, his career was as a successful Philadelphia corporate and industrial photographer. And then finally, 2 people to my right, and I guess it's not that difficult to pick you out, a woman on the panel. Lisa Shaftel has worked in the entertainment industry as a scenic designer, scenic artist, prop person, puppet designer, builder, and storyboard artist. She's worked on Broadway shows, regional theater, professional opera and ballet, and many other venues throughout the United States and abroad. She's taught graphic design at LaSalle College, and she joined the Graphic Artists Guild in 1985. She was elected National Advocacy Chair in January 2004, at least I have the right century, and served 4 terms. She's currently their National Advocacy Liaison. She's a member of the United Scenic Artists Local 829, IATSE Local 481, and the Association of Theatrical Artists and Craftspeople. I just think it's interesting to note those kinds of memberships because it shows how very broad, your background is. In any case.
Trying to make money.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. All right, so I'd like to ask each of our panelists first to talk about your own experience as an author, artist, performer, including how you got into the field, what it's like to earn a living in the current environment, and the obstacles as well as the advantages of being in the digital environment, and whether it's harder or easier now for people to earn money doing what you do or did than it was when you first got into the field. So maybe, Gene, you could start.
Thanks, June. Am I on, right?
You have to press it. It'll be green if you.
Okay, good. There we go. First, I'm obliged to say that as a self-employed person and having been a constant promoter of myself over the years, I'm leaving ASMP as of December 31, and as they say in the unemployment lines, I'm seeking new opportunities. So keep that in mind. I graduated from University of Pennsylvania in 1970. I know that's hard to believe. And declared myself a photographer. My career was a series of movements from, I guess, one client to what I perceived to be better clients, and ultimately moved my work from corporate industrial, where I felt intense competition from emerging students and an increasing number of emerging photographers, to heavy industrial work, which at that time had a significantly higher barrier to entry, and became a photographer for companies like Mack Truck, Heister Company, forklifts, Ingersoll Rand, doing assembly line tools. And we shot big productions on city streets and in studios around the country where we had to indemnify municipalities, hire bulldogs, have models, close city streets, do the kinds of things that were necessary to create images for advertising and collateral work. I got out of the business 12 years ago to become executive director of ASMP, and it was just at the time that the digital transition was coming full force. I think it's had a dramatic effect on the photography business. I think it has, to a large degree, complicated matters. What was supposed to be better, faster, and cheaper may be better, may in some cases be faster, at least on the capture end, but has complicated the whole issue of archiving and retouching, and photographers are now responsible for a significantly increased workload that previously was done by service bureaus. So we deliver print files directly to our clients. The issues of attribution persistent attribution have complicated things greatly. It was much easier to maintain control over images when they were confined to the analog space. Now you deliver digital files to a client. They may, by agreement, be supposed to destroy those files on the determination of the license. You never know if they do or not. Easier to move those files around. And I guess the demand for rights, or the scope of rights requested by clients today, has greatly expanded. And the ability to enforce one's copyright is almost non-existent. And even to the point where now, with the expansion of fair use, I question the, I guess, ability for copyright to survive in the image space. That's enough of a tragedy scope for now.
That's an upbeat note. Lisa.
First, I want to thank you, June, for holding this symposium on this topic and inviting us. Because too often, the point of view or the experience of the author or creator, the person on the panel, is a publisher or a distributor or an IP attorney, with all due respect, who works for a large corporate copyright owner, such as a production company. And it's very unusual that there are authors and creators who actually create original creative works and earn money doing that, who are sitting on these panels, rather than someone who's a distributor, so to speak, or a publisher. And I have found that even IP attorneys generally have absolutely no idea what we do every day for work and what we get paid for and what's involved in our jobs and our clients, and especially artists. I think the vast majority of the public is still stuck in this silly caricature of someone wearing a chambray smock with a beret on her head, standing at an easel and painting a canvas and hanging it on a wall and hoping someone buys it. We are what used to be called commercial artists, when that was a sneer against real artists who were fine artists. We produce, our job is visual communication, as is photographers. We produce visual works that are intended for distribution or reproduction. We work in every field of industry in the United States. Look around you. Everything that you see was designed by a graphic artist or an illustrator, from this typeface to the pattern on June's shirt. Everything around you, look on that folder, every piece of product packaging, everything you touch and look at every day was designed by a graphic artist. We are an integral part of the American economy, and nothing that you use and read and look at every day would exist without us. That said, how I got into this, I didn't choose this, it chose me. I was one of those kids who drew compulsively, and really the only question was, by the time I was a teenager, how do I get paid to do this? Because the thought of doing anything else all day long was kind of intolerable. I was fortunate. I grew up in New York City. I went on a class trip when I was a teenager to the Metropolitan Opera. Had a backstage tour. We walked into the paint shop. I saw women. They were painting. They were getting paid for it. And I said, that's cool. That's what I want to do. Because it was really clear to me that I was not going to get paid enough to live on by making pictures and trying to sell them. When I was in college, I did a summer internship at an ad agency in 1979 in the Chrysler Building, whose main client was Nikon Camera. And I was that college summer intern, and it was Mad Men in 1979. And I knew all of those people. And I hated every minute of it and decided that I didn't want to work in advertising. Went to theater school and got into doing scenery, painting the scenery props, making stuff. And it was a regular paying job, and I've always made graphic props and then got into doing exhibits and display work. And I was that last generation that had to learn how to draw to be an artist instead of learning how to use a computer. Can I keep going? No.
I don't know, who's doing the
I got
time?
timed.
Yeah, you're okay? All right. Okay, it's just, we're going to go through a few rounds. We're going to try to keep the responses limited. David Lowery, please.
And this is just how we got here?
Yeah.
Okay. I was a math and computer guy at UC Santa Cruz. Oh, yeah, I put this, thank you. I was a math and computer guy at UC Santa Cruz, go banana slugs, in 1983. In the sort of at the birth of the latest iteration of Silicon Valley. And I was also in a band at the same time. And for many years, I've always considered as like, God, why did I start a band, you know? I would have made so much more money if I didn't become a musician, you know, right? However, I made an album in summer of 1984 with 4 friends. We had a band called Camper Van Beethoven. We managed to get an independent distributor to distribute this record. And we actually got it played on college radio, and the BBC started to play it and stuff, and we started to earn some revenue. I was surprised, though, that although it was a significant amount of revenue and we could now tour, that the actual activity of touring wasn't really profitable, and it required a lot of other things to tour, right? And so I didn't know what to do, so I asked a friend of mine who was like this rich cowboy, basically, rich cattle rancher. He goes, well, what we do is I give you money to buy a van so you can tour, and then I get 20% of your next album, sort of as a copyright arrangement, you know. Basically, he was going to take part of our sound recording copyright in exchange for bringing us money so we could go on tour. And we did this. I thought, this is kind of fantastic, you know? I mean, we're just from nowhere, and we get to, you know, we sort of independently created our own path. We played very weird music, too, if you've heard those first couple of records and stuff like that. But I was sort of, ever since then, I've been sort of fascinated by this right of copyright, which essentially launched me into my 30-year musical career. And I often wonder how hard it is for people today to do that same thing. Because I don't think Pete, the guy, the cowboy, I don't think he would have given us the money for the van with the way that copyright is enforced today. There is no enforcement for copyright. Your value in a sound recording or a song is dramatically reduced. So a niche artist like Camper Van Beethoven would have never we might have made one record. We would have made that first record, but we would never have made records 2 through 10. Right? That's the value of copyright.
Okay, yeah, I'm Rick Carnes, and I am a songwriter, have been on my whole professional life. I was born at a very early age, and then very early on, I discovered that I was unemployable. But then everybody kept telling me, you know, because I kept saying, I want to be a musician, I want to be a songwriter. And they kept telling me I had to get a real job. You know, I would try to rent an apartment or something, and in order to get the lights turned on, I'd have to go down to the, like, gas and water people and tell them that I had a job and that I was trustworthy enough to, you know, have my lights and electricity turn on. And I'd say, I'm a songwriter, I'm a musician. They go, yeah, but what do you do for a living? And so I realized this is tough, so I decided I would go be a professional student. And then I could just say, okay, I'm a student, and then they would turn my lights on. That worked for about 6 years. I got 2 degrees. I ended up with like a master's degree and 56 postgraduate hours in music and everything else I could take until they just threw me out. And I left school prepared for life in the 15th century, basically. So then I had a problem. I really had to produce something, you know, to make the living, to get my lights turned on. So I started playing. I married a very talented singer. That was my saving grace right at that point. And so we went out and toured for about 5 years, you know, going around and playing, getting enough money together. And then I realized, you know, we can't just tour like this forever. We've got to find a way to actually make a living as songwriters and musicians. And there was only one hope for doing that, and that was copyright. I mean, absent copyright, I would still be playing in bars. Not, you know, for much money, and not able to have a, you know, buy a house, have a family, pay for my medical insurance, self-employment tax, everything that TJ was talking about. So I went to Nashville, Tennessee, where they had these things called music publishers, which I found out magically paid you to write songs. And I went in, got signed off the street at what is now Sony Music. At that time was Tree Music Publishing. There were 116 songwriters employed there. And I got my first contract, and then I rented a house, and I went down to Nashville Electric Service, and they said, what do you do for a living? They actually asked this question again, and I said, I'm a songwriter. And they said, what have you written? And I went, wow, this is it. You know, I have found nirvana, okay? And so that was because copyright was the way, it was the second most important industry in that town, okay? And they'd rent a house to you. You could buy a car, you know, all these wonderful things because of copyright. And I'm extremely thankful that during my life I was able to survive producing copyrights, because there were times in my life, being unemployable, that I really depended on nothing but copyright. At one point I lost, you know, I've been on record labels. You know, they used to all end in letters, you know, MCA, RCA, EA, WEA. I ran the entire alphabet ending in A. But then when I ran out of alphabetical record labels to sign with, I was unemployed. The only thing that kept me alive during that period of time was that I had songs on other people's albums, and they were making money. And just as I was about to lose the house, the car, everything, a check would come into the mail from something that I'd written 5 or 6 years previous, thank God. Okay? It doesn't happen much anymore because the term of copyright has been shortened from the point where I finish the song and create the first demo to the time that somebody uploads it to the internet. So that's kind of where I am right now, so I'll stop.
David Hayden.
My name is David Hajdu. I wrote down what I wanted to say because I sold the rights to movie rights to 2 of my books, and bought a house and got a divorce. I've been with lawyers before; they make me nervous. I started out in journalism right after college in 1978. Almost precisely when the Copyright Act of 1976 was going into effect. So I entered journalism profession at a time that was acutely favorable for writers. It was perhaps the time that was most favorable for writers in American history. My first job was editing for trade magazines, and I did that while I carried that day job. I was writing pitches for freelance journalism for real magazines during my lunch hours and at night. In the freelance journalism that I did, that was my first serious journalism, I sold there's a phrase from the past, first-time serial rights. Now, this was a phrase that was part of the lingua franca of journalism practice in 1978 that is lost to time today. Among journalists. I wrote for the Village Voice as a young writer. The age of my students today, I wrote for the Village Voice, Rolling Stone. By the mid-'90s, the New York Times and Newsweek. I made a reasonably good living at doing this, and by the early '80s, I was able to quit my day job and make a living as a freelance writer in New York. I raised 2 kids in New York that way. As a freelance writer, I would do a piece for Newsweek. I'd be paid fairly well for it because they bought the first-time serial rights, which is standard in those days. I would be paid for each time Newsweek would republish that article in one of its many publications around the world. And I'd still own the rights to those pieces and could anthologize them if I ever wanted to subject the world to the embarrassments of my apprenticeship. I teach now at the journalism school here at Columbia, and I am terrified to tell my students about how things were for me when I was their age. I'm not that sadistic. I mean, for me to describe a time when I owned the rights to my work, I sold at first-time rights. I was paid multiple times for one piece of writing. I might as well be describing writing on parchment in Mesopotamia. In the 1990s, for nearly 10 years, I was a top editor at a magazine called Entertainment Weekly at Time Inc. About halfway through my tenure there, the internet was rising. The brass at Time Inc. called it, they wanted to, that would control the rhetoric around the internet, and they were trying to establish the term the information superhighway. And we're prohibited from referring to the internet as the internet. We needed to call it the information superhighway. Well, okay, I'm not going to bash Time Inc. anymore because this is on the record and this will be in the Columbia Law Review. We were, at one point about halfway into my tenure there, all the senior editors, the senior staff, I was a top editor there, were instructed to follow a mandate to require to stop here, Time Inc. said, and to pick up this thought when I come back, says the man with the sign that says stop.
Good for you.
So I will leave you hanging, just desperate to find out what Time Inc., this mandated Time Inc. was.
You will have an opportunity.
Okay.
All right, so I would like to ask each of you to talk about how you came, thank you. All right, let me start again. I'd like to ask each of you to talk about how and why you came to serve in a representative capacity or to start to teach in your field. And also to finish whatever you didn't say the first time around. All right, Gene.
Well, through my career as a working photographer, I had been a member of ASMP, Commercial Photographers Trade Association. So I started out as a member, then served as a local chapter president, and then moved on to the national board and served repeatedly as a treasurer. And then ultimately, when everyone else stepped back, I ended up being president in 2002, I guess it was, and then ultimately the previous director retired after 13 years of service, and I decided to apply for the job. I was looking for a change from moving around 15 to 16 cases of equipment and multiple hand trucks and dealing with, I guess, some of the struggle that we dealt with over the years as a working photographer, and was eager to put some other skills to work and become an advocate for working photographers. So that was the transition, and I guess I've always had a drive to be a volunteer, strangely, in my home and school, on a synagogue board, and on other nonprofits. I've been a frequent participant over the years, so I continue that work. But that's, I mean, in a nutshell. But
Could I ask, my sense was that ASMP became more active during your tenure in terms of being involved in policy issues.
well, I guess my interest, I always had a strong interest in photographers' rights, and I guess during my term, I made an effort to make ASMP much more of a, I guess, an effort to make us much more of an influencer in the conversation, and much of that was done through, I guess, first-person participation at meetings and events that our previous director was not quite as disposed to do. So I enjoy travel, I enjoy conversation, and I enjoy, again, being an advocate. So, I made a great effort to reach out and work more closely with the Copyright Office, and we were involved in the original discussions related to the creation of the ECO registration system, and we've been involved in all of the orphan works discussions over the years directly, and I think the position that we've taken has been by and large constructive and not obstructive, and I think that's it. I mean,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa?
How I got involved in advocacy. I think most people who become advocates or activists do so as a reaction to a really bad experience. Long story short, I got screwed over by a big client. And I'll say them because there was no litigation, Hasbro Toys, right here in New York, down on 34th Street. And without going into the details, I had been working on their buyer showroom, and it's not like they didn't know who I was or how to get a hold of me. I was downstairs and had worked for them for 4 seasons. And lo and behold, without any discussion with me, my work was used on millions of units of product packaging for Cabbage Patch dolls sold all over the United States, and I didn't get a dime. 1991, and had a really nasty experience with their legal department, who basically said, "So sue me, ha ha ha. You're a small independent artist, and we got a whole legal department that we pay a regular salary, whatever it is they're working on, and we will bankrupt you and your family and drag this out for 10 years until you give up." Instead of just paying me whatever they had budgeted for product packaging for that year. And I have a big chip on my shoulder. So that's why I do what I do, and I do this through the Graphic Artists Guild, because we are the only advocacy organization that works for the economic and legal rights of artists in the United States. And through that, I became involved with the Advocacy Committee and learned about copyright and contracts and licensing, and I teach I give seminars as a guest lecturer. I teach visual creators business practices, how to price their work, copyright, but not copyright law, copyright as it pertains to how we make a living, and contracts and licensing. And I do that because I can't get a decent fee for my work, and I can't get my clients to sign my written agreements if my colleagues are working for free or working for beer money or working on speculation or working on oral agreements because they're pooping in my pool. Because we all teach our clients how to work with us, and every artist that works for free or works on speculation or does a logo for $150 is teaching that client, who will tell all of their friends, that our work has no value, or that they can get a student or the next door neighbor's teenage daughter to do it for free. And I don't bet anyone in this room has ever had that experience of a client asking, how much do you charge? And then the response is, my neighbor's daughter is an artist. She said she'd do it for free if I paid for the materials. And that's what we're up against. And I have an MFA, and that's what I'm up against. The marketplace has changed. Touching on that, there have always been amateurs. Of course, there have always been amateurs and professionals, but as I said earlier, I'm a dinosaur. I had to draw to get into art school. I had to draw really well to graduate from art school. Now anyone can buy a computer, and they can buy software, and they can call themselves a graphic artist. They can build a website. Everybody has a camera. Everybody can call themselves a photographer. That doesn't mean the pictures that they take are any good. Our fees have stagnated and dropped because of the devaluation of our work and the flood of amateurs in the marketplace. Artists used to be hired on staff at all sorts of businesses. We're now hired as day players for day rates, not even weekly, not even on contract for the entire duration of a job. And we are paid the same fee for what's now unlimited use of our work as we used to get paid for one-time use. And no benefits.
Like I said, that was an important piece of information I gave you, that I was a mathematician and a computer programmer when Silicon Valley was in its infancy, because
Sorry,
as
I don't
went through my
think, I don't think your mic is on.
It's on, but you have to
Is
speak
it?
more into it, yeah.
I've never had anybody say I'm not talking loud enough, actually. That's really weird. But no, seriously, I'm known for, my wife's always like, come on, bring it down. You're not on stage. All right, so I'm a computer program. I was a computer programmer and a mathematician. My peers were that. I went into the music business. My friends went into Silicon Valley, right? And there was this point where they would come to my shows and they go, wow, it must be pretty cool being a rock star, right? Yeah, well, you guys fly on private planes, do you have boats, whatever. And then, a few years later, suddenly my friends are coming to the shows and they're like, hey, do you want to go out on my yacht, right? I've always had a foot in the technology world. So what happened was I was seen as a very technology-friendly artist. I was invited to speak at the San Francisco Music Tech. I presented this piece where essentially I said, hey, it didn't really pan out the way it was supposed to. Artists are getting less money. I got huge blowback from the technology bloggers and the press and stuff like that. And in particular, a lot of people told me I was wrong about this, which is that this is a corporate, piracy is corporate, not only corporate sponsored, but they make all the money off of it, right? Here you have a website. I did this right now. I just checked for this. Found some of my songs on this website called Dillendow. You can just get a little app that'll show you the served source code on your iPhone. And so right here, I'm making sure, yeah, we've got a Florida-Georgia state line song there. We got quite a number of songs here that are popular. And when I scroll down into the source code, I find a block that's reserved for ads by Google. I find another block right here. It shows Google syndication. And this is mass copyright infringement. Anybody know, is that a RICO predicate? Yes, it's a RICO predicate. And nobody does anything about this. In fact, there was wait, I lied. They had voluntary White House meetings, sort of panel that put together that created, we're going to take care of this paper, right? And then a second paper that said, okay, we have some loose ideas about how to take care of it. And then finally they put out the quality assurance guidelines, which walked all of that backwards. I think I'm the only person to ever read the quality assurance guidelines. But this is my thing. We don't go after the individual pot smokers. We go after the drug dealers. We don't go after the prostitutes and the Johns. We go after the pimps. In this case, I don't have a packet logger. I cannot say for sure that a Google ad went onto this website, but this website certainly has a slot to ping Google ad syndication and Google ad services. And when I go back to my hotel, I'm going to check this, and I bet it's there. There is a smoking gun. Nobody does anything about it. The Department of Justice left songwriters twisting in the wind, you know, on this thing, and has allowed major corporations to make hundreds of millions of dollars off of this activity.
Rick?
Sorry, I just love it when a songwriter starts ranting. You know, it's just like my favorite moment.
That's not a rant. Loud statement.
It's a
of
statement
fact.
of fact. That's what I always tell people.
I know I'm in front of lawyers, okay? I'm not afraid of anything I said right there.
Absolutely. Except for perhaps Eric Schmidt is not going to be arrested for pimping. I just don't think that's going to, possibly, but not necessarily. I got started, you know, like I was saying, as a songwriter professionally in like 1978. And in my co-writing experience, I met the great John D. Loudermilk, the writer of Tobacco Road, amongst many other huge hit songs. And John D. was a great proponent of the Songwriters Guild of America, and he took me to a meeting, and I got signed up. It was almost a religious moment. And through my work with the Songwriters Guild, I eventually became an executive vice president. And then in the year 2002, George David Weiss, the great composer from here in New York, wrote the line, "Sleeps Tonight" and "What a Wonderful World." George became very ill, and they looked around the room to decide who could be the interim president until George got well. And as I said, I spent so many years in college. I got all these degrees, and one of them happened to be political science. And I said, okay, well, we need somebody that can go to Washington and testify and do all that stuff. And said, so Rick, you're the guy. And what happened was George resigned, and I went from being interim president to accidentally being president. And I've been president ever since. It's been a very difficult position to be in at this time because, unfortunately, I became president just as rampant music looting on the internet became the norm. And and as you know, David will attest, it's been a very difficult environment in Washington to discuss the looting of our work. And so I've mostly been involved in that, and it's taken away from my songwriting career tremendously, but I've been willing to do it. I got into teaching. I was a professor of songwriting at MTSU for a couple of years. I got into that because I realized I was going to be in the room with 16 to 18-year-old kids teaching them how to write anyway, because all the recordings that you could get were co-written with the artist, and all the artists were under 18 years old. So I thought, okay, well, it's so hard to get anything recorded by these people, I might as well make them pay me to teach them. So I became a professor, and I'll stop there and just yield the floor.
Dave?
The turn for me came in the mid-1990s when publishers such as Time Inc., but not only Time Inc., recognized the financial value, with the rise of the internet, recognized the financial value in holding all rights to their content. And while I was an editor at Entertainment Weekly, the brass instituted a mandate for all the editors to require freelancers to sign work-for-hire agreements. As a condition, of writing for the magazine. It was not an option, it was a condition of writing for the magazine. This was a mandate. So I considered this an assault on writers' rights and a perversion of the principle of work for hire, which is a legitimate principle, and a principle with value. So I declined to require my writers to sign the agreements. The accounting department was under instructions not to pay anyone who had not signed a work for hire agreement, so my writers could not be paid. I buckled under. I required this of my writers. I hated myself for it, and still wish I had not done it. I still wish I had drawn a line in the sand and fought, but I did not. In the years since, I've grown inured to the overreaching terms of the agreements to which we all check. Yes, I agree to these terms every day. I feel like a passive citizen in a fascist regime. And I know I'm not alone in my passivity, but that does not make my passivity benign. My passivity is insidious. I'm not prone to self-loathing. I'm not trying to, but I think I'm not alone in making a very big mistake by just happily, blithely going along with this. Over the years since I started out in journalism, the voracious appetite for content in the digital world has had transforming consequences for the practice of my discipline, just as it has in every field that we're talking about here today and most fields that we're not talking about here. The framework for the production of journalism, like the framework for the production of work in other fields, has changed from the writers believing at the time when I was starting out in 1978 that I should be paid, to thinking, well, maybe I won't be paid, to thinking, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be paid. The rise of digital communication has had enormous benefits for journalism now, benefits which arguably perhaps outweigh the liabilities, or at least counterbalance or offset to some degree the liabilities. With the rise of digital communication, we have crowdsourcing of information in journalism, immeasurably valuable. My students are tweeting and using Twitter feeds as a resource. I cannot measure the value of that. They're doing data visualization and they're doing data mining, enormously valuable. But at the same time, the liabilities are real. Journalists largely underpaid and stripped of the rights to their work through the tyranny of work for hire, have a lower and lower sense of their standing in the culture, of the value of their work, and a lower sense of self-worth. There's been a shrinking in the talent pool, professionally speaking, although that pool is really hard to measure because in the web, professionals and amateurs are commingling. These comments will be published in the Columbia Law Review. I'm interested to see if we'll have first-time serial rights or if we'll be signing a right for hire.
And, yeah, it's not a work for hire.
Okay, that's good.
Right, so I would like each of you to address the question of what do you think authors, artists, performers, at least in your area, your field, need in terms of the copyright law? Are there changes that they need? Or is it the problem not so much with the law as with something else? So if you could talk about that.
All right, great. I guess the money load question here. I mean, for me, I guess, and for visual artists, the issue really isn't copyright. The issue is ultimately fair compensation, and that's the ultimate end game here, and that's why we seek copyright protection. I think under the current state of affairs, visual artists at least have very limited to no recourse regarding their rights. The barriers to entry, it's a federal action. The disruption to business, the cost, whether or not you've registered your work prior to the infringement, all of these factors contribute to making and taking on a legal action very difficult. I think some of the things that we've been asking for over the last few years has been a small claims or ADR means to address copyright infringements. I know for most of my photographers, the average settlement would probably be under $20,000, and considerably under in some cases, if they were to engage in ADR. In my talks with photographer friends in the UK, I know they've established a small claims regime that, by all discussions I've had, has been very successful in the last year. We'd also like to see registration from within workflow so that a photographer doesn't have to leave his digital asset management program to make a registration. You could simply create an action from within any of the DAM programs, and it would send materials off to the Copyright Office and simultaneously put them into a registry, either for orphan works or other identification purposes. Concurrently with that, we'd like to see a flat fee, an annual fee for visual works, whether it's $300, $400, $500, or whatever it needed to be, at least that be an option so that you could register any number of works within the year. I think there's been a failing amongst the visual arts community in our inability to create a frictionless licensing system. And since it is easier to steal than to license, people will continue to steal. I've said frequently over the last few years, I believe that everyone has figured out how to make money off of photographs except for photographers. And there's any number of businesses built on the display and distribution of photography without any compensation going back to the rights holder. And I'm not asking for the biggest piece of the pie, but I'm asking for some piece of the pie, that there should be some. If you're making money off the display and distribution of my intellectual property, then I should have a piece of that profit, of that revenue stream. And to that end, we've been working with a group of the visual arts associations to create an author managed RRO/CMO to ultimately move money back directly into the hands of rights holders rather than to publishers, where most of it ends up here in the U.S.
Gene touched on a lot of things that I would have said because Graphic Artists Guild and ASMP work together closely on a lot of this legislative advocacy and copyright reform. Some of the things that are a little different for artistic works, photographs have group registration allowed, other visual works don't. This would be really easy to change in copyright law, and I think that there's some general misperception of how many artworks visual creators create. We all understand how many photographs people take, but I think there's a real misunderstanding of how many visual works illustrators and graphic artists create every year. And more artists would register if we had group registration, and perhaps an option of the pay one price annual fee, unlimited registration for works created in that year. I appreciate Maria Palante's compendium that she released in August. The Copyright Office released that. There was a tremendous amount of work. It's terrific. There's better explanations of published and unpublished works and what is copyrightable in terms of visual works. Frankly, we'd like to see the distinction between published and unpublished works eliminated altogether. It doesn't apply in this digital age. It's hard to figure this out with the internet. It's very confusing for graphic artists and illustrators to figure out in the many ways that our work is displayed and distributed, what is published and unpublished. And it seems to be, to me, a throwback to the 1909 Act and the requirement of things actually being physically printed and distributed. But, you know, it's in a lot of aspects of copyright law, of the code, that would have to be changed. The DMCA takedown procedure doesn't work. We all know this. Violators just repost. I found my works on websites in Thailand. What am I going to do? I can't even read the Thai to figure out if they're selling prints or not. As Gene pointed out, small value copyright claims court. Most of our members say, we just want to get paid for the use of our work. We don't want to stop people from using our work. We're not looking to hit the jackpot here. But, you know, it's death by 1,000 cuts. That $500, that $1,500 that we don't get every month, that's really significant to us. And the point of law is irrelevant. We can't sue everybody who infringes our work. Very often, the people who use our work without authorization or subsequent use are our clients. We just want to send them a bill and get paid. Cool, you use it for something else. To quote from Goodfellas, F you, pay me. That's all we want. We don't want to say no, we just want to get paid. Fair use, the transformative interpretation of fair use when it comes to visual works. Carew versus Prince, Jeff Koons, oh boy. To visual creators, what we think of transformative is literally changing what the work looks like and not changing the meaning. Visual works are visual communication. We create images that are telling a story or carrying a message to a target audience. And if that work is displayed to a different audience or displayed or shown in a different medium, the whole point is that the different viewer will perceive a different message. That's not transformation. That's the nature of what visual communication is. And in general, our country needs education of the general public about copyright. People don't know what they're doing is stealing.
My turn? Okay. By the way, she just talked about the DMCA takedown notices. You guys know what that is, right? It's a very specific, set of words that we put together and we send to the company that is essentially, or the person that is making our work available without our permission, right? I wanted to show you something. That website I showed you a minute ago, according to Google's own transparency report, they have received 11,383,575 infringement notices against that one site. Those who created the DMCA did not intend this to be this way, I'm sure. What the DMCA takedown notice really should be is a takedown, stay down. And then we have a pretty good law, right? Not every time. You can't just run it right back up on the system. So, but that's what we have right now, right? 11 million notices for that one website, but yet you're selling, or you're possibly selling advertising on that website. I would say that's red flag knowledge too. The other thing is we have to make sure when we reform copyright law that we don't make things worse. And this isn't really my territory, is photography, but I've seen some proposals for what's called orphans' works, that when I look at them, I say, wait a minute, this just creates an incentive for people to strip the metadata off of the photograph, post it somewhere, and then just take it and then pay the orphan works fee, right? As a songwriter, as a copyright owner here, I may not be the same as everybody else. I'm not asking to make a living. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm not asking for a mandated fee for the use of my work. I'm just asking for control of my work so I can treat it as a property-like right and do with it what I want to do. If I want to write the song, record it on a CD, and throw it in the ocean, I can. I don't want to be compelled to do business with people, especially people like, somebody who's got 11 million copyright infringement notices against them. I'd rather not do business with them, right?
Thanks. I just want to mention about orphan works, because the basic purpose or aim of the orphan works bill is to make works available at least more available than they currently are when you can't find the copyright owner, find who it is, or locate them in order to ask permission. And so the kind of stereotypical orphan work owner is somebody who's completely inattentive or indifferent to the use of their works, or maybe they don't even know that they're the owner. But unfortunately, things like photographs and illustrations get swept up in that because they may be attentive and they may not be indifferent at all, but their works, because the metadata is removed, appear to be orphan works to people who use the internet. So that is a problem with orphan works, yeah.
I mean, Facebook, when you upload to Instagram or Facebook, it automatically strips metadata from your images, and beyond that, they take a third-party license to everything you upload. So whether you like it or not, they have the right to take your works and use it for whatever purpose they'd like to use it for. They haven't exercised that extensively, but the right exists. In regard specifically to orphan works, the impression that I had, I guess most recently, is that the fervor or the cry for orphan works legislation seems to have been significantly quelled with the expansion of fair use. I don't hear people calling for orphan works. I mean, to me, all the universities and libraries that were the prime drivers for that legislation seem to be quite happy laying claim to fair use at this point. I don't know if anybody sees that differently, but that's what I've seen.
Okay. I'm going to expand. I have a wish list here, and I just want to issue the disclaimer that I'm not going to be able to go through everything extensively, but I will be writing an article for the Journal of Law and the Arts that will expand on this and explain it at greater length. But let me just go down the list real fast and pull out your pens and write this down if you want to. Top of the list right now, the Marriage Equity and Copyright Act, which grants the same rights to same-sex couples in copyright so that they can hand their work down to their spouse, et cetera, et cetera. Senator Leahy is just now introducing it. It's a bipartisan bill, and we would like to see that bill passed. As Gene and Lisa talked about, the small claims court concept, it's not actually a small claims court as proposed by the Copyright Office. It's a dual opt-in mediation, which keeps me from having to make a federal case out of each individual act of infringement, so that I don't have to pay $250,000 and end up finding out I'm suing a 12-year-old girl in Harlem. Okay, it just that doesn't work. We need to have a system that actually is a credible deterrent, but is not completely out of the range of possibility for an individual artist of any stripe to be able to sue an infringer. The DMCA notice and takedown has been described many times as a whack-a-mole game, but I want to say it's not a whack-a-mole game, because whack-a-mole is actually fun, and and there's actually an end to the whack-a-mole game. Okay, DMCA is not fun at all, and there is no end to it for us. I think that we need an automatic termination of copyright for songwriters, artists, everybody, and like at the end of that term, the work should revert back to the creator without us having to jump through 1,000 hoops to make sure that we get our rights back. I think there ought to be an auditing clause included in the compulsory license. Okay, if they're going to force us to license, then they ought to be forced to be transparent about the payments. Okay, that's all I'm asking. Let's see. We need to dial back the encroachment of fair use. Once fair use has actually swallowed use itself, I think it's gone too far. Okay, once copyright becomes a small exception to fair use, I think that's kind of a problem. Okay, and just in the marketplace, and I know it's the right to contract and all that stupid stuff, but control composition clauses. I mean, how many of you are lawyers, law students? Okay, well, shame on you if you ever negotiate a contract that has a controlled composition clause in it. It is the most anti-creator, anti-cultural thing you can possibly do. Okay, enough said.
Well, most of my scholarship and my writing is in the field of music. We've covered that pretty exhaustively here. I could add maybe 2 additional thoughts to possible amendments, fixes to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in terms of takedown. It might be good, it would be good, to have a more robust process for uploading material, so it's not just so easy to get stuff up there. And it might be great, it would be great if creative artists had some sort of preemptive way to stop their work from being uploaded. Otherwise, I'm a big believer in education, and here in terms of journalism here at Columbia, we were, as June knows, because she's spoken in our classes, we require the art students to read the copyright law in its entirety. They read 350 pages of the copyright law. They can't graduate without doing that. And I wish more lawyers would do that.
It's a page turner.
Yeah.
Experience with the person who gave the CD. Oh, God. Okay. So I wanted to ask Lisa Tony's story yesterday, and it really goes to the question of copyright education. And so if you wouldn't mind, Lisa, that would be very instructive, I think.
One of my many horror stories in the trenches. So I give seminars, I live in the Boston area, I give seminars here and there, usually at art schools, about copyright contracts licensing for visual creators, and often at Mass Art, Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And usually the people in the audience are working professionals. They're never art students or people who've recently graduated, because they just want to create and they don't care about all this business stuff. And you know, if they post their work on Facebook, woohoo. And it's people who've been working for a while and trying to earn a living, who've gotten screwed or are having trouble getting paid, and they realize, I have to learn how to do this. And they come to my seminars, and there's always a couple of people who want to continue to talk to me afterwards. So a couple years ago, man, about my age, photographer, got all fired up. I think it was the contracts presentation at Mass Art, and he invited me to meet him for coffee sometime afterwards to continue the conversation. And I agreed, and it was about a month later, we met at a Panera Bread in the Boston area, and we sat down at the table, we were talking, he was telling me about his work and his contracts, and asking me what other clauses should he have in his contracts and some problems he's had with clients. And then he pulls out of his jacket pocket and puts on the table 3 CD jewel box cases, and I see he's got printed labels on them like out of his own printer at home, and it looks like music CDs. And he's talking to me, and I have one eye on this stack of CDs, and I'm wondering what's up with that. And about an hour into the conversation, he said, you know, he was so grateful I'd spent this time with him, and he would have been willing to pay me a consultation fee, which I don't do. But he thought that he would give me a gift as compensation for being so nice to meet him for a coffee and helping him. And I told the story last night at dinner, and Gene's heard this. So he Googled my name, and now it gets kind of cyber stalker-ish. And of all the 23 pages on Google that turns up with my name, and some of them are embarrassing, he found my Amazon wish list, which is open because I have family all over the country, and that's how we give each other gifts. He found my Amazon wish list, kind of stalker, and went to my Amazon page and saw that I had some music CDs picked out on my wish list. And instead of then buying the music CDs for me while he was on Amazon or buying them from some other website, he then spent some extra time to go find them on some other illegal music site, and he downloaded the music files, the new John Hyatt at the time, the new Sade, and an old Leon Russell, and then spent even more time finding other images on the internet, other people's artwork to swipe and make his own labels, because it's fun. And he was going to give me these as a thank you. And I sat there with my head swimming, like, I don't know what's creepier, is that he stalked me on my Amazon.com wish list, or that he illegally stole music or that he illegally stole art. I mean, how many ways is this bad? And he's smiling at me and pushing them across the table, and and he's telling me about them, and I said, I'm sorry, thank you for the thought, but I can't accept these. I pay for my music, and I didn't even think to go to the artwork because that was just, I thought I'd puke. And he looked so surprised at me, and I said, well, you asked me to come here, you're a photographer, you asked me to meet with you to talk about how to protect the copyright for your work, and you just stole music and art. And the look on his face was just priceless. I mean, he was speechless, and I thought to myself, well, he's not going to want the Sade. John Hyatt and Leon Russell he'll probably keep, but...
So I wonder if I could ask the rest of you, how much do you think it's an education issue, and how much do you think it's just better free?
Can I give you an example?
Yeah.
I do this with my students every year. How many of you actually have any copyrights in this room? Raise your hand. Okay. So, is that a hand raised? Yes, it's a hand raised. How about you? Do you have a copy? You didn't raise your hand. You don't have any copyrights? No. Do you have a flip phone like Walter White? No? Do you have a smartphone? Do you take pictures with it? You have a copyright. A lot of people don't realize that. That's the first thing we have to do with students. Sorry, I didn't mean to make an example of you. Actually, in my classes, nobody raises their hands, actually, right? And I start calling them Walter White for a while because he has a flip phone that he has to, nobody can track him on. Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing, is everybody, if you take a photo, you've got a copyright. And everybody has one. Once everybody has one, the debate is entirely different.
Well, yes and no, because the response you get sometimes is, yeah, but I like to share. I'm perfectly happy for people to use my stuff, so why shouldn't people be perfectly happy for me to use theirs?
Well, then that goes to step 2 of the education. It goes, that's cool. I'm going to use it. I'm going to create a national ad campaign for this and put it on billboards all over the country and on buses. And you still have some people that say no, 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 but you start chipping away at this. You can do it in 10 minutes. I think you can do it in 10 minutes and get quite a few people converted to think about it in a different way.
Can I
Thank
interject
you
here?
for being good-natured and
Okay.
answering your questions for me. So.
One thing that your example takes us to is that the value of the making of creative work in the example that you gave is rooted in the social exchange of that work. It's not in financial compensation. So your students are doing that to share it for free so that they can get the social benefits of that exchange. So that's where the value is rooted, and I think that's one of the problems. They see the value in this and giving it away, sharing it widely for the cool that imparts.
Well, they grow
and for
up-
the social status that imparts, but not for the financial compensation.
That's the problem, is that we talk about it in financial terms instead of control
Well,
of your own work.
If I may, it's more than just financial. It is about a whole generation that was brought up with the idea that sharing is caring.
Yep.
Okay? No, I'm serious. They really do feel this social, thing about this is a good thing. It's universally good to share. However, I was just in Montreal, and I had 2 people. I was taking pictures of the artwork that they have up on these great murals that they do, and people walked into the picture, and both of them stopped and told me I had to erase the picture because you're not allowed to take a picture of anyone in Montreal without their permission. Okay? So sharing is caring until it crosses over into the privacy, okay? So this is a really interesting debate, and I think that privacy and permission are 2 things we need to link, because the idea of sharing is caring breaks down when it's your stuff they're sharing without your permission, okay? So I think that's where we ought to approach the education. We ought to approach the education from the personal perspective, not the global social perspective, okay?
Yeah, I would agree with Rick. I think privacy is the next big pinch point. I think that's what people are going to be concerned about. I have a 28 and a 30-year-old, 28-year-old daughter and 30-year-old son who were big fans of LimeWire many years ago, and I told them that their father was an advocate for creators' rights and they couldn't use LimeWire, and ever since then I've been paying the bill for their downloads of music through iTunes, goes right to my credit card. As does their Easy Pass, don't ask me why.
They go buy it, it goes through your credit card.
Goes with the territory, right? They're always your children. And now I lost my, you see, you make a joke, you lose your train of thought. I'll get back to it. I'll have to think of what I lost.
Privacy.
It was privacy, but no, there was something else. I'll think of it in a minute.
I think it's time to cut off that 30-year-old.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree with you.
Lisa?
I'd see a clear change in ethics in our society when it comes to digital works. And we were talking about this at dinner last night. There seems to be a very clear understanding of value of something that's tangible, a printed book. There's paper, there's cardboard, there's the cost of the printer, with a complete disconnect to the author. The cost of printing the book, the cost of the plastic of burning a CD, the cost of physically buying a poster. But somehow, when that creative work exists as electrons, it has no value anymore.
But,
and
you know,
there's a total disconnection from
We never had that
who the
price
creator is.
discovery point on digital files, did we? You know, I mean, a digital file is much more valuable than a concrete object file.
Well, but each digital file, each duplication of a digital file is exactly the same as the
Right.
original.
That's what makes it more valuable.
Whereas if you photocopy a book or you photocopy a poster, there's a degradation. It's not the same as the original.
Right.
And people don't, there's this change in ethics that I think people come up with their own rationalizations and justifications to make their own behavior okay. That duplicating or sharing or displaying electrons doesn't hurt anyone, and it's not stealing because it's just electrons. There's no physical object, whether it's, online or in some other manner. And the bright line of ethics in our country seems to be stealing the physical object. The same people who would never walk into a store and steal a book or a poster or a CD or software think nothing of stealing it off the internet. They think nothing of stealing it and pasting it on their Facebook page or putting it on Pinterest. Don't get me started on Pinterest. They think nothing of stealing it off the internet and printing it out and using it in their workplace, in their business, in education. There's this new movement now that everything should be free for education. You put the slogan, "It's for the children," on it, and everybody votes for whatever it is in this country, including a new baseball stadium. It's for the children. There is an entire industry in this country of creators of all types who earn a living making educational materials. And on the college and graduate level, depending on what you're teaching in a class, anything can be used for an educational purpose. And this notion that colleges are going to cut costs somehow by squeezing out the authors and creators who create the actual content that is the meat of the education. This is what our society is supposed to do, is educate our children. And if our educational institutions are seeking to cut costs, there are lots of ways to do it, but starving the authors and the creators is not the way to do it. Maybe our government needs to subsidize this. Maybe that's a better use for our taxpayer money as part of public education and private education.
Jean, and then after Jean, I'm going to open it for questions.
All right, I remembered the 30-year-old deadbeat triggered it in my mind here. The deal is, he's willing to pay. He's willing to pay, not his Easy Pass bill or iTunes, but he's willing to pay for the use of digital materials, but he wants to pay once. He doesn't want to have to pay multiple parties. He said, I'm willing to pay, but you guys got to figure out the distribution of those funds and where it's going and who gets it. But I thought that was an interesting observation just from someone who was, born and bred in the digital world. The other, to to the argument Lisa made about this greater good, this is just an observation. It seemed to me in Judge Chin's decision related to the Authors Guild case, it seemed to kind of reference the fact that, this transformative use that was being made was answering some higher purpose or higher order, and there was kind of a greater good component here. And I guess I've always failed to see the power of that argument, because if you take it to, I guess, a logical conclusion, in my mind, it would be wonderful if poor and hungry people could walk into supermarkets and help themselves to food off the shelves. I mean, I think that's a greater good. That's a wonderful thing. Let them eat. But it doesn't work that way. And if you're, cold on a freezing day and you're out on the street and you have nowhere to live, you can't walk into a department store and grab a coat and be warm. It just doesn't work that way. And why people don't perceive the underlying work or the digital material that they use to then, quote, transform or make into, as the foundation for their own work as bearing the need to at least be acknowledged or in fact compensated in some way, I don't get it. I mean, you go to any other industry, if it's car manufacturing, they pay for all their raw materials. From where I sit, our underlying works in many cases are simply the raw materials for other people's success. And why that shouldn't be compensated, I don't know.
Just really quickly, I mean, that public good idea is generally, we do want to help hungry people. We do want to keep people from freezing and stuff like that. The thing that's crazy when that argument is used to us as artists is like, why isn't it, if it's a public good, why doesn't the public share the costs, right? Instead of just, it's like, it would be just as random as saying, okay, there's this public good, like starving people need to be fed. We need to fix that. So everybody that's wearing a red shirt today has to pay, just today, this one day, has to donate money to feed starving people, right? It's completely arbitrary. I mean, and nobody gets these arguments, how absurd these arguments are. And it's so startling that judges will even make these arguments. That's my point.
All right, let me just ask if anyone has any questions. Brad?
David Hajdu.
Oh, could you speak into the mic? So, that'd be great.
David,
Press it down.
yes, it says speak, no?
No, I guess that's right. Sorry, yours are different from ours.
Is this on?
Yeah.
I can just talk really loud. David, I'm curious about what role you think copyright can play in journalism beyond what it's already doing. Obviously, the problems of the newspaper industry and traditional news outlets extend far beyond copyright. They're business model problems. And there's been some movement in copyright with cases like the Meltwater case and the so-called Google tax in Europe to sort of deal with aggregators and create some remuneration through aggregators. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering, just from your perspective, as an industry insider, what you think copyright can do to sort of increase the incentives for journalistic works of authorship.
Well, it can do what it has historically done, which is promote the progress of the field by serving as an incentive to the creators of it. It can do the same thing that it does in other fields. It is less of an incentive when there's less compensation. So I think that's fairly simple, and I think there are multiple problems that have all been on the table here. One is work for hire, and the other is just the voracious appetite of this beast of the web for content, and this complicated proposition that content wants to be free. I don't see that. I think there's a danger in us seeing that in terms that are too simplistic. For professionals, compensation is important and valuable as an incentive, but not everybody who's making content is a professional, including citizen journalists, or my 11-year-old who's taking pictures. And I think this idea that there's the value for him in the process of taking and sharing the process is the social value is totally legitimate. And it's our challenge and the challenge of the populace to hold conflicting ideas in our brains at the same time, as intelligent people, and try to figure out solutions.
Yes, Rob? Oh, can you press it?
Cleverly labeled speak. Robert Levine, I want to address something both David said, that, historically there's been another purpose of copyright more internationally than in the U.S., which is that it gives a creator some control. And what David Lowery said was, when you talk to people who want to work for free, who want to distribute their work for free, about control, they get very different ideas. They might say, it's okay to use my work as an ad, as long as it's for a company I like. What about if it's a political ad for a candidate you hate? There have been some big, David Byrne sued, I think, Charlie Crist, and I think it's settled, but shows David Byrne's sense of humor. He made Crist deliver a video apology, which is, sometimes you might want an apology more than the money. You saw this in the Beastie Boys case. I forget the company they were against.
Goldie Blocks.
Thank you, Goldie Blocks. I think a lot of people laughed. The Beastie Boys said it wasn't about the money. I think a lot of people scoffed at that. I believe it to be true. Maybe I don't know. What about uses of your work that you would object to? And my question for David Hajdu is, what about, obviously this doesn't really apply to an 11-year-old, but are these conflicting ideas, or are these the same ideas? People who share work for free might feel very differently who controls it. This also gets into questions of privacy in some ways. We think of these as privacy, but...
Well, I don't think anybody's sharing work for free. There's an enormous business in this area of the country we haven't really heard very much about. It's called Silicon Valley, that is built on people sharing stuff, right? And it's not that the internet wants this stuff for free. And this is one of the problems of talking about the internet. The internet is not a place. It's not a thing. It's a loose collection of private companies, largely. The internet doesn't want this stuff to be free. Private companies need this stuff to be easily shared and free so that they can, basically have happy customers, right? I'm sorry. Now, what was your question? Now I'm just like.
Well, is there a way here to change people's attitudes? People tend to be, the vast mass of people that are against copyright. When Instagram changed its terms of service, there was an uproar.
Right.
Is there an argument here that's not being made, or not being made often enough or well enough, that can change things?
Well, yes. I was going to go off on a tangent saying that's not even that's the wrong question, because this stuff isn't free. But I'll let. Since David has more of a social view on this, I'll let him take it from here.
I'm not sure I have an answer to that. It's a good, very, very good question. I'd like to think about it some more. But I think practice plays a big role in changing attitudes. I don't think practice always follows attitudes. We could use the example of the day when all journalists, newspapers decided to provide their content for free. It's not necessarily that everyone at home who had been paying for the newspaper and had gotten accustomed to paying for the newspaper and thinking of the newspaper as worth paying for suddenly wanted it for free. They were getting it. They suddenly were getting it for free. And the getting it for free changed the way people thought about it, and that degraded the conception of value in that work to the people. So the public's brains were rewired by getting it for free. And I think now we're seeing paywalls being instituted, and the Times is paying. I think that we're seeing very little pushback on the part of the population, of the public from that. And I think if there were more, this is the part I don't know how to answer, more mechanisms that required payment, I don't think we would get that much pushback from the public. I don't think the public is really clamoring for things to be free. I think that if it's available for free, most people think, well, gee, well, why not?
You know,
So I don't know how to resolve this issue of stopping everybody getting it for free.
I think you're right about the idea of people getting, they're confused about information wanting to be free when art is not information. Art is unique expression, okay? It's like when my songs are passed around for free, they feel cheap and used. You know what I mean? It's really about the fact that, you know, attribution seems to be a bigger deal to people than payment, okay? Well, let's go to where they are. I mean, you know, when Instagram says we can use all your images, no, you can't. They have to be attributed, and they're my image, okay? Now we can start talking about something that people understand, and then back them up into the idea that, oh, by the way, this is a unique expression, okay? And you want that. You want to hear somebody actually add to the idea of what a love song is with their own unique expression. And that's important, and all the First Amendment stuff is baked into the copyright law already.
So those paywalls that, you know, are going up to users, at the same time, many of those entities that are erecting the paywall, somehow or another, that revenue stream doesn't find its way back to the contributors. Right. And so they're being paid at the same level that they were always being paid for an expanded rights position on all platforms in all media, without any additional compensation for that extended use, even when the cases are that the entity is charging for it.
Yeah, I'd like to know what could be done to ensure that there is payment to the providers of the content in the case when the paywalls are instituted. Like the Times, for instance, now has a paywall and they're selling but there are pieces of mine that are up there from the mid-'80s that I did not sign work for hire agreements for. They do not have the rights. They do not have the right to even publish that material again. And I don't know what to do. You're the lawyer, June. What should I do?
Well, after the Tassini case, if you wanted to
Tassini.
write for the Times, you had to sign a contract that said, not only is this a work for hire for the future, but everything I did in the past I'm assigning to you, so you can use that too. So if you signed one of those agreements,
Oh,
Yeah.
Retroactive.
retroactive. Oh, God.
Jay,
This is for the songwriters. For the past 100 years, you've been subject to a compulsory license under Section 115, where you are not allowed to say no. Some people want to expand it, others want to do away with it. How do you feel about the compulsory license? Is it good or bad for songwriters?
Well, first of all, it's really about what we get in return for the compulsory license, it's about remuneration. I mean, if we get fair value, and Eddie this afternoon will be talking about a thing we're starting called Fair Trade Music. And we've just done a huge, elaborate study on what the actual value of a song is. And this goes back to the digital files and things like that. You know, we have new uses of songs. We're just now beginning to determine what the value is. The compulsory license does actually make it easier for people to license, and I get that. And we do want the licensing process to be as seamless and as smooth and as easy for the marketplace so we can make more money. But we've gotten into a situation where if you look at the price of postage stamps from 1909 till now, the price has escalated massively. But if you look at the price of songs, the price has devalued massively to almost zero at this point if you look at the streaming rate. So you look at situations like that and you go, okay, well, I think that there's more creative value in a song than a postage stamp, okay? So the compulsory license isn't working in terms of being able to, you know, compensate us for our work.
I was just at George Mason Law School, and Richard Epstein spoke during lunch. I believe, isn't he Columbia, right? No? What? Okay, NYU or something. Well, okay. Maybe he went to school here. I don't know. Somehow I thought about that. Well, he spoke for 90 minutes at lunch. And somewhere in those 90, from no notes, like completely amazing, like just, if you've ever heard him speak, it's really amazing. But somewhere in those 30 minutes, I didn't quite, there was about 30 minutes in there in which he addressed my question, about the compulsory license. I didn't quite understand what he said, but he said, "You're right." Okay, so I was right. And essentially, I think what he was talking about was this, that these compulsory licenses are basically bad when they set prices. They're okay when they allow for easier licensing, right? So, and let me give you an example. I don't know if you guys realize this, but songwriters are perhaps the most heavily regulated industry in the United States. Apparently, airplanes will fall from the sky if we are not kept under a Department of Justice consent decree, and that it is of national security importance that we do not set the price for our songs without the supervision of a single judge in New York. The songs, there's only one place where songwriters get to set a free marketplace for their music, and that's when your song goes like essentially into a film, commercial, television, right? There's actual free market negotiation. Or maybe if toy is going to use your theme song or your song as a theme or something like that. That is the only case that I know of, off the top of my head, where there's free market negotiation. So mostly when it's used on radio, when it's used webcasting, streaming, the rates are set essentially under the watchful and I would say abusive supervision of the federal government. When you compare the price of a song when a song is licensed to film, television, commercial use, it is assigned the same value as the sound recording, right? They're considered, in most negotiations, overall, in general, the songwriter is paid the same as the person who owns the recording of the song, right? Okay? But yet you see in webcasting, the song gets about 1/14 of what the sound recording gets. In streaming, where you have free market negotiation for the sound recording gets about 6 times what the song gets, which is under the thumb of the government. I think we can all objectively say that the compulsory license, based on empirical, widely available data that cannot be disputed, that the compulsory licenses forces down the price of the song. It is in effect a subsidy for broadcasters, webcasters, and streamers. Why am I wearing the red shirt? Why am I the person that is selected by the federal government to subsidize these industries?
7 days a week.
7 days a week, right? You think the minimum wage sucks? Try the maximum wage. That's what we have.
Yes.
Eddie Schwartz, Songwriter Association of Canada, and Rick and I work together on Music Creators North America. The recapture, automatic recapture right, Rick, that you mentioned, I think that's a brilliant idea. As a songwriter, you have many of them, but
I'm just stunned to hear you say that.
Recapture is the one place 35 for those who don't know, or recapture 35 years after publication of a song, you can knock on your publisher's door and get the copyright back. Of all the copyright law is complex, but I think as a songwriter, as a creator, I can say that is one of the most enlightened provisions, I think, in U.S. copyright law. So since there's some attorneys in the room, I have some questions about the fact that it's only for the territory of the United States. So you can only, any songwriter or composer anywhere in the world can recapture their copyright, but only for the territory of the United States. And I would like to, I don't know who might comment on this on the panel, but since we are now in a global economy, and Google is a global company, and Apple's a global company, if we were to get automatic reversion of all creative works to creators after a certain period of time, so that they would at the very least be able to renegotiate their works in a fair market situation with their publisher, because many of us assign our rights when we're very young and no one knows the value of our work, and we sell it in perpetuity for virtually nothing. But again, U.S. copyright law intercedes and says 35 years later, you get a second shot at that negotiation, essentially,
Yeah,
or
know,
you can take it elsewhere. So what I'm asking is, could U.S. copyright law be modified so that we have our rights revert back to us automatically, globally, as opposed to just in the territory of the United States?
I don't know that we can do that because it's, extraterritorial laws that we can't really change. The Songwriters Guild and the NMPA, the National Music Publishers Association, combined to go to Congress back in '76 and get that law changed. And it was an agreement that we made between the publishers and the songwriters, and we went to Congress together to do that. I would suggest that that sort of agreement would have to take place globally in all these different venues in order to get that changed.
So even if the assignment of the copyrights in the U.S.,
Yeah, I don't know
we can
whether
only
we
change
do-
that law within the United States?
Can we do that? Can we? Well, I mean, I don't think we can change it outside of our own territory.
Well, copyright law is territorial, and I have to know, do you know that, sure, by any chance? I think that's the reason, is that you can only mandate that change of ownership in your own country.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Yeah,
you're
but-
right that we should get a second chance to negotiate that contract or the value with our, renegotiate it 35 years, because as the previous speaker was saying, nobody put a gun to your head or came to your house and threatened you to sign a contract. He's obviously not in the music business.
All right, unfortunately, I have to cut this short because our lunch actually started 10 minutes ago. So I would like to thank the panel first. This is really terrific. So thank you very much.